Well, good afternoon. Delighted to have a little bit of your time, so thank you for that. I know it's precious. And so just by way of introduction of yourself, if I may, so I've done a little bit of research, and for those listening, please do a little bit of research on Dale, because I think we've got somebody who is truly sort of multi-faceted from a climate activist perspective. So in summary, there's Ecotricity, which is, I don't know, the first biggest, most serious, green energy company in the UK. That's one. So founder and CEO. You're chair of a green football club, being a vegan, and they're vegan as well, as I understand, or maybe the Dart's vegan. I came across you on the Outrage and Optimism podcast, by the way, number 105. That was a great one. And this is, I don't know if you can see my t-shirt, Stubborn Climate Optimist. There we go. Love them, but that was a great interview. Seaspiracy, you're a founder of that, fantastic film, really enjoyed that, obviously scary as well. You took Farage apart in an interview, loved that. And then also you've written a book, so Manifesto, How a Maverick Entrepreneur Took on British Energy and Won. And I'm sure 1,000 other things, Dal. But please, anyway, people listening, do a bit of research, have a look. And I think that in itself is inspirational. So I have a few questions for you. And before that, by the way, if I said anything wrong, then please put me right. Or if you want to add anything, I know there's a million things to add.
It's fine. No,
yeah?
it's perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So my first question, I suppose, is really me mulling over all of those amazing things. I am a business person, or have been a business person. I'm late to waking up to the challenges of climate, and it really came with the SDGs. You've been in it pretty much all your life. You've done all of those things. But I'd like to ask you, sort of, how do you describe yourself at the moment? Because clearly you've been on a bit of a journey, but how do you describe yourself at the moment?
Well, first and foremost, I'm an environmentalist, and I chose 25 years ago to use business as a tool to bring about environment change. My first focus was energy, to change the way energy was made in Britain. I formed Ecotricity. We were the world's first green energy company back then. And I'm still an environmentalist. We widened our mission to include food and transport in the early 2000s. And our rationale was that in the mid-90s, energy was the biggest cause of carbon emissions in our country, and therefore climate change. So it made sense to start there. In the 2000s, we went looking for the second and third biggest cause, and we found transport and food. And between them, 80% of everybody's personal carbon footprint is in there. So for us, it made sense to have our focus around energy, transport, and food. It's a lovely, simple message. You have to just look at how you power yourself, how you travel, and what you eat, and you're taking care of 8/10 of the problem. So yeah, I'm an environmentalist using business as a tool, and trying to create, you can see the flag here behind me, a green Britain.
Excellent. And could you just touch on transport a little bit, because I didn't mention that in the run-up there.
Yeah, so 2008, I wanted a greener car. I wanted an electric one, but there were none in the world. So we decided to make one. We made the Nemesis, Britain's first electric supercar. Got it on the road in 2010, and it led me to realize that to make this electric car revolution happen, we needed a charging infrastructure. I had the real world experience of being on the road in an electric car with nowhere to plug in. So we started the electric highway. It was the world's first national network of charging points for electric cars in 2011. And that's pretty much what we've done in transport. We're building an electric motorbike at the moment. I've been waiting for years for the proper bike companies to do that, but they're not doing it. And we're building an electric hovercraft as well. That one's for fun, but also we've got a bit of an inventive idea kind of in there as well. But that's us on transport.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And obviously all of this highly entrepreneurial. I mean, it sort of goes without saying, but so for me,
there are things that aren't being done that need to be done. I honestly don't care about business, and I don't care about money. For me, these are things that need to be done to enable a more sustainable future. Nobody's doing them, so I get on and do them.
Okay, excellent. And I want to come to a couple of sort of, system questions a bit later, because yeah, that's worrying me. I'm puzzling over it, and I'm sure many others are. So, but before we go there, if we could just sort of have a bit of a think about the UK, and on the one hand, I think COP26 helped us all, I guess, or upgrade our understanding or our sensitivity around environmental issues and climate change. We've got the net zero law by 2050. We've got this sort of 2035 rollout of ICE, or sort of end of rollout of ICE. So yeah, some plus points. on the other hand, at the moment, there's some really, really big questions about which direction we're traveling in. So just a question to you, sort of where do you think we are really as a country? Maybe in comparison to others, or maybe just sort of instinctively from what you see and hear. It's...
Well, comparing us to others, I'm not really interested in. If you perhaps get what I'll explain what I mean, because we know what needs to be done, right? We've set out the goal of net zero and all them other kinds of things. We have the technology. Economics is on our side. People want it to happen, but we aren't doing it. So I don't really care if China are doing it, the US are doing it, whatever. It doesn't matter, because we know what we need to do and we have the means to do it, and we are not doing it. So that falls on us.
And are you, let's say, you sanguine about the outlook at the moment?
As much as I ever have been, really. I think that I say we know what we need to do. That's progress, right? I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years. I went to COP3 in Japan, and the world signed up to its first climate or carbon reduction targets, and that was like a big deal. But they were tiny, but it was a big deal that we had one. And right now, the world recognizes the urgency of getting to 100% carbon reduction, which is also a big deal and quite amazing. We've come an awful long way in a quarter of a century, but now we've got to do it. We've got to close that gap now between the progress we've made and where we can see we need to be, and we've got to do it really quickly. I do think that to a degree, it's in our nature not to move until we're really slapped in the face with a problem. Like the war in Ukraine has kind of brought a real focus to energy, and out of nowhere, the EU has a 15% energy reduction target, which they're going to hit in no time, right? Why couldn't they do that to fight the climate crisis? Why did it take mad fossil fuel prices to make that happen? That's my best example.
Yeah, and I take some comfort from, I suppose, you thinking that everybody, broadly gets it, and now we've just got to execute it, because I fear that a lot of people don't, and in part willfully, because it's such a huge, not consciously and willfully, but because it's such a huge issue that people bury their head in the sand. And I'm really talking, I think, business is part of that. It's a sort of systemic issue. They find it very difficult to sort of reconfigure, to think how to do it, apart from at the fringes by putting up solar panels and stuff. And so I think, everybody getting it is fantastic, but I think we're still, the thing that's happening in the Pakistan at the moment, unbelievable. The numbers, that a third of the country underwater, it just sort of beggars belief. And yet you look at the amount of footage it's getting in the news, it's getting a bit, but it's marginal. It is marginal.
Look, the thing about the climate crisis is it's always been a distant thing in terms of geography and time, right? It's always been about something that's going to happen in 50 years' time and might be happening already on the other side of the world. But this year we saw it come home, in the words of that football song. The climate crisis came home to Europe and to Britain this year. London had more wildfires a month ago, or more fires, I should say, than it's had since the Second World War. And on the very same day, Rishi Sunak, the man that would be our PM, doubled down on the ban on onshore wind. I don't know how that made any sense for him to do that. Liz Truss, who probably will be our next PM, is against solar. So we do have a problem with right-wing politicians, actually. And the reason that Britain hasn't gone further is really simply down to our government. And within the party of government, there are people that believe that we can solve this energy crisis with more fossil fuels, for example. And then you have people like Farage, who you mentioned. They just don't have facts. They believe that we don't have enough resource to power ourselves 100%, and even if we did, we can't make the grid work, and even if we did, it would be really expensive. And these are the things that I debunked in that interview that you mentioned. So we have a real problem in persuading an element of society that this is the right thing to do. Not just the right thing to do, but the most economic, the most sensible thing that we can do with our time and our money right now.
Yeah, and just a slight digression. I mean, you mentioned facts. I think that, in that interview, you talk about at the beginning of your start in business, you appreciated data, you did your research, you got into facts. And I think it's, we don't all have to be complete data nerds, but I think getting your head around the facts, getting your head around some of the numbers is very useful. It's really useful, because there's still a hot debate about the extent of impact, and also the extent and the opportunity for solutions, whether they exist or not. So.
And it's driven by anecdote and misunderstanding and an opinion that gets repeated so often it becomes like established fact. The big one from Farage being that we just don't have enough land for all of the windmills and the solar panels that we need. So I told them we need 1% of our land actually to do that job. That's a surprising figure. That's not deep data, right? That's a simple statistic. 1% of our land. That's context for people. And you say, okay, that's fine. Then they may say, but it's going to cost us a lot of money. But onshore wind and solar need no money, so it's free. Well, that's context as well, right? 1% of our land, we have to put no money into it. What are we actually waiting for?
Yeah, no, I love it, and there's no riposte to that sort of stuff. So if we could just
we moved on.
Sorry.
Yes. So we moved on in the interview. We just moved on to the next one. There is no riposte. You're right. Sorry.
So yeah, you mentioned COP and COP3, and as I said, I've come to this latterly, and I was fascinated by COP26 and what was going on. I was staggered to find out there'd been so many before, to be honest. So what I was hoping though, what I felt was almost beginning to happen in COP26, and maybe this is wrong from your perspective, is that it could become a very useful event to crystallize everybody's thoughts around climate action against a big thing in the diary that we all understand. So it's not a sort of policy meeting of people that we don't really know who they are and what they're talking about. Actually, it's something for the people, and it seemed like lots of people participated in COP26. There was lots of contextual coverage that we could all understand, and so my hope was that this COP on an annual basis becomes this big thing, both because it's really, really important in itself, but also because it's a useful way of convening people. And of course, if it does, hopefully that then makes the politicians on their mettle a little bit more. So I don't know, but please tell us, what do you think about the COP process? Is it important? Is it fit for purpose? Is it pushing us forward? Is it a good thing?
I think it can be mind-numbingly complex and dull, actually, the whole COP process. I think the awareness of it in Britain had never been higher than it was during COP26, but I think it's because we held it in Britain, right? And it faded away very quickly. So that might explain how you felt that there was a lot of engagement. And I'm not knocking that. There was engagement, and that was a good thing. I think it's the first COP held in Britain, and so you might expect that we get more engaged about that. Having said that, it's mind-numbingly complex and dull. That's, from my perspective, is super important. These guys do come together every year. They wade through enormous complexity, and in the past, and still to a degree now, resistance from some countries of the world to having accords at the end of the process they can put out and say, we've reached agreement, this is what we're going to do next. I think the challenge and the job for COP right now is to focus on actions, which is what they did coming out of COP26. It's going to be an annual review of the national commitments to get to net zero. That's new, and increasingly that's what COP needs to do now. Review actions. It's not about targets anymore. We've got all the targets we need. We've got the right targets now. We've got to hit them, and I see that as the role of COP.
No, well said. And I suppose that's the top of the tree when it comes to sort of policy and policy making, and then obviously you've got national policy. But I've been curious about this debate, which seems a bit ridiculous to me, which is grassroots individual action versus policy government driven. And people seem to want to talk about that. To me, it's pretty obvious. Everybody's got to chip in, and everybody in every role has got to do something. But do you note that debate that happens, and any views on it?
Yeah, I see it. There are all kinds of things that pop up on there a bit like that. I just think, as you say, we all have to do what we can, and we need everybody. From my perspective, the players in this game are the people, businesses, and government. And I think people get it the most, actually. If you look at opinion polls and stuff like that, people want action the most, and that's increasing across the board. Businesses have picked this agenda up increasingly in the last few years and are changing the products that they offer as well as how they operate, because they know that their customers are judging them on that. That's an important feedback loop for businesses to do that. And when they change what they do and they change their products, they make products more accessible. to more people to actually live a low carbon lifestyle rather than just have an opinion. You know, the best example is probably plant-based food. It's exploded in our country and in other parts of the world in the last 2 or 3 years. It's simply everywhere. That's because businesses are making it, but they feel that people want it, so they make more. People try it, like it, and buy it, and you know, it's a great old positive feedback loop. And then you've got government who are sensitive to what people want. They are sensitive to what business wants, but they do tend to be behind the curve. But all three play their role in making this happen. Government have the most important role and the biggest levers. They control the economy and regulations. You know, they set the laws around what we can do, what we can't do, and what we must do. And they control the economic playing field, which is currently tipped against the good things in favor of the bad things. And so they have the most important job, but they aren't quite getting to grips with it yet.
Yeah, I agree. And then maybe, I suppose, maybe the best way we can influence them is by using our voice to explain that we care. I mean, I was struck by, I think it was yesterday, they were the BBC was reporting on the polls in the US, where something like 80% of the population think that, you know, climate change and climate action is a policy issue, is a big policy issue, but they think that nobody else cares about it. So 30, when they're asked the average of when they think how many other people care, it's about 37%. Extraordinary. So
yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah, absolutely extraordinary. So, you know, if they,
I just need to. Sorry,
come
on. No, sorry.
I was just going to say, so, you know, if those politicians really believe that, you know, we care and that's what we want to see, and we want to see action in the short term, they're going to talk about that. You know, that's been remarkably absent from the current, you know, from the current profile, particularly in the leadership contest at the moment, and it's because they don't think the people they're talking to care about it.
And the people they're talking to are 160,000 members of the Conservative Party that are overwhelmingly, like more than 90% male, aged and white, right? They represent 0.5% of the electorate, and they have particular views that don't represent the whole country. And it explains what Sunak and Truss are saying and doing about renewables and everything else. You know, I mean, why are we calling the French our enemies, you know, for example? They're just playing to the gallery. You've got to hope when they get to number 10, whichever one is, it will be Liz Truss, I'm pretty sure, that they then get a little bit real.
I agree. And thank God we're not old right now.
Yeah. I'm only pointing out the demographic. You know, we're talking over 60, white and male, over 90% of them. That's an amazing statistic. That's the electorate for our next prime minister. Yeah, I'm white, male, and old as well. I know that. Doesn't make us bad people. Right? Doesn't make us bad people.
Good. Thank you for saying that.
Or anybody else, right?
Very good. Yeah, so I did a big survey of businesses about their sort of climate narrative and what they were doing just before the run-up to COP26. We interviewed about 450 companies, and everybody talked about decarbonisation. Very few talked about resilience, adaptation, let alone, you know, supporting or thinking about the resilience of the sort of the communities that they were part of. Now, some businesses obviously have been doing that for a long time. You know, they have to because of their, you know, distributed supply chains, but very few people talked about that. I was struck by that. And I just question to you is, do you think we've got the balance generally right in the conversation, the narrative between, you know, adaptation and decarbonisation?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't have an opinion on that.
Okay.
That's rare. All right,
All right.
That's rare.
Well, I'm just going to offer a short one. I think it's no.
Anyway. Yeah, I could have guessed that.
I think, you know,
I had a feeling.
The loss, the damage that, you know, they're going to be talking about at COP27, you know, is case in point. And I think we're beginning to realize and understand what adaptation needs to be here. I mean, you've already mentioned it. We've got high temperatures coming our way or have come our way in a way that we haven't seen before. That means adapting our housing stock, you know, and to make it livable. Anyway, moving on. So
and our work patterns. Anyway.
So the way that we frame for Wood COP27, the way we frame sort of climate action really is in terms of 4 outcomes. So decarbonisation and resilience, which is what we just talked about, but also justice and circularity. So I'd just like to touch on those last two. So when we talk about justice, it means, you know, particularly climate justice, it means sort of many things to many people. So just wanted to ask you, what does it mean to you?
Fairness, even-handedness, consistency, and equal treatment.
Yeah.
Top of my head.
No.
I think social justice is a really big issue, and I don't believe that we can have true sustainability without social justice. That's my view. People have to be treated decently, properly, as part of the move to the green economy, which is coming, has to come, will come. And the question is, how late will it be? It will be late now, but how late? But we have to have social justice as well. Why is it that millions of people in our country work, maybe one or even two jobs, but can't afford to feed their families? How can that be right? While businesses make vast profits for shareholders, we have to have social justice in the next industrial revolution.
And I think that is a precursor to that almost, which is a better universal voice, a better functioning democracy, where, and I think that, to have, if you like, the spoils evenly distributed, you've got to have people in the decision making, which is evenly distributed as well. If that makes any sense.
Do you mean the demographic of people in power?
Yeah, in part, yes. And perhaps even a process and a system which allows more input. And you've already touched on one element of that.
Because our democracy is rubbish, right?
Perfect.
My view. It's not representative. 60% of us are unrepresented by this government, which has an 80-seat majority with a 40% of the national vote. How can that be a democracy?
Yeah, and I think that's a precursor to proper justice and proper decision making. So the coming to circularity, I mean, obviously these are all massive issues, but just coming to the circularity point, the thing that worries me about that is, I was very keen on EVs and I was pushing that. We've mentioned those already. Very excited about the opportunities there, and then, again, late to the game, sort of thinking, oh, well, that's going to create a massive issue as we go forward in terms of, waste, in terms of exploitation of minerals, et cetera. And, it's rather like a conversation about windmills and their blades and what we do with them. So I suppose just any reflections there on just making sure that the systems that systems, approaches, sectors, if you like, that we shape and build now in response primarily to GHG and decarbonisation, don't then just give us, future generations a massive headache. A different one, but a big one.
Yeah, I understand. So I suppose a couple of things to say about that. One is, I think that there's a different test applied to green things, a different moral and economic test. And this question, for example, of mining for electric car batteries, not for the lithium, for something else. I forget the name of it for a second. But there's been a lot of discussion about that. It's been raised as a problem with electric vehicles without anybody realizing that the same element has been used in the refining of oil and gas for decades. Nobody raised it then. Batteries for electric cars are fairly resource intensive to be made. The lithium itself should be mined without the unjust treatment of people, for sure. But the important thing to note is whatever it takes to make an electric car in terms of resources, the fuel source essentially is reusable. Whatever we do, however we mine oil and gas, and however much we think we can afford to burn, it's a single-use fuel. So whatever it takes to get to this place where we have reusable fuels, renewable energy that never runs out, and all of that kind of stuff, it's almost a single hit that we have to take. And I'm not saying that we should allow bad things to happen. I'm saying we need to bear that in mind. At the moment, we mine and pump oil and gas and just burn it, and then have to mine and pump some more. And that's, obviously far from sustainable. So I do think there's a different test applied to green stuff as well, from people that, are just too willing to let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yeah, that's very good. And yeah, in absolute terms, obviously, all that mineral exploitation is a bad thing, but you're right. If that pales in comparison to what's actually happening at the moment, and it's a replacement, then obviously that's better than what's happening.
And Windmill Blades, by the way, Windmill Blades, there's been a lot of progress made with the making of blades that are actually recyclable. That's coming next.
Good. So big question. Two questions left. So this one is sort of, again, apologies for me sort of stumbling over the puzzles that I see, but I suppose we have a system which has been configured to, I don't know, maximize consumption, record it as output, map it as GDP, and obviously there's a whole this big sort of conversation about GDP not being the right thing to measure, and et cetera, but it does seem to me now, at my ripe old age, that I've suddenly understood actually that this focus on consumption has driven us in a direction of travel, and the associated sort of systems, approaches, and policy, but it's driven us in a direction which has actually caused and created not just climate change, but also the loss of biodiversity, et cetera, and it's really, it's put the blinkers basically on us, and we seem to be, focusing on rather a singular metric, which has driven us in the wrong direction. So that begs the question, which is, I suppose, twofold, which is, you mentioned the next industrial revolution, do we need to fundamentally change? Can we work within the system broadly, of course, to make some substantial changes, or do we have to change the system? And I did note in one of your early interviews, you did say we don't have to give things up. And I just wonder, don't some of us have to give things up? So I know there's two questions in there, but,
I think some of us have to give some things up. And actually, when we're talking about this more broadly, levels of consumption matter as well. When I say we don't have to give things up, it's a simple green populist message, actually, for the people that basically they are under the impression that in order to live this more sustainable life, we've got to give stuff up, and we've got to live a life that is of a lower standard. At the extreme, you'll see people say, you want us all to live in caves, which is obviously silly, but that's the kind of impression people are given. And our point is that we don't have to give up the fundamental stuff. We like to say, whether it's cars, burgers, football, or now even diamonds, because we've operated in all of those spheres and we've found another way to do something. We say that we don't have to give stuff up, just find another way to do it.
Yeah, and what I hope is that maybe people like me who are only just waking up learn from people who are fully awake and understand actually all this work around mapping GDP to happiness and income to happiness and all that sort of thing, that it's not giving up on the important things, which is quality of life in terms of how you feel, how healthy you are, how happy you feel. That's not what you have to give up, but you might have to reconfigure or reposition how you think that what you need to do to consume and be in order to drive those outcomes.
Yeah, my best probably example is food, right? So this sustainable future is not about starving ourselves, it's about eating different food. And if you look at the crises that we face as a world, there's obviously the climate crisis, but there's also the wildlife crisis. We're driving it to extinction. And then there are multiple human health crises that are driven by fossil fuels and animal farming. And so the two things we have to change are how we power ourselves. We have to give up fossil fuels, and how we feed ourselves. And we have to stop intensive animal agriculture. 75% of all farmland globally will be freed up, or would be freed up, if we only ate plants. Animal farming is so incredibly inefficient, you couldn't make the statistics up. It's madness. So to get to sustainability, if we change our diets to plants, which are incredibly nutritious, animals get everything that we value getting from them, they get from plants. They're just the middleman. There's nothing short in a plant diet. We can live better, longer, healthier, happier lives because animal products are the root of numerous chronic human illnesses, particularly the ones that affect us later in life. Cancers, heart disease, diabetes, that kind of stuff. The stuff that can't be cured, you simply have to live with until you die. We can avoid all of that by changing our diet, so we can be happier. We can give land back to wildlife, which at the same time allows for rewilding, which will suck carbon from the atmosphere. We can go back to where we used to be before industrialization. And, everybody wins. Climate wins, animals win, we win. And we have to give up fossil fuels. Just two things, fossil fuels and animal farming. All of our problems unwind.
Okay, well, you're talking to a vegan. I know you're a vegan, and it did crack me up when the Channel 4 interviewer asked you, "Is it easy to, is it easy to live or cook a vegan meal or something?" It was just like, why you just anyway. Okay, so final question, Del. So what is next for you? So, you know, all these things which seem to be helping us and guiding us in the right direction, they're all symbolic in many ways, I think, in terms of what we should be doing, what we should be striving for, which is fantastic. It's inspirational. But what next for you?
Good question. I want to get involved in the next election. I think it's the most important of our lifetimes. I think if we don't elect a government that gets it and does something about it, the climate crisis and all the other stuff that's going on, then I think then we're going to face some very serious consequences. We had a decade, according to the UN, to take action to avoid major temperature shifts above 1.5 degrees, and we've pretty much wasted half of that decade with the conservative government that we've had. Johnson, and now we'll have Truss for a couple of years, or maybe in a couple of weeks, who knows. Super important that we get a government that has grown up about these issues and tackles them. So that's where I want to throw my weight next. Got a few little things in development. In R&D, we've got a water machine I think has got a big role to play in the coming water crisis, not just in remote parts of the world, but it's happening here in Britain as well. We're taking a look at flying. We think there's something to be done around zero carbon flying in the next 12 to 24 months. And obviously Forest Green, we've got to get to the championship, build a new wooden football stadium, and continue to transmit the message through the medium of sport, which has been super successful. I think it's more or less it. You know, I'm going to also chill out a bit and enjoy myself.
I somehow doubt it, but anyway, you do enjoy yourself. Okay, brilliant.
It's important. It's an important part of the message as well, to have fun. If you're not having fun when you're talking to people about this stuff, then again, it just looks dour and it looks about giving stuff up. So, you know, it's an important part of my message. I live it as well. It's not fake.
Got it. No, okay. Well, thank you so much for that. So just, yeah, thank you to everybody listening in. I think a wide range of points there. I'll put some notes certainly on the website where we will post the transcript, and then we'll put a link in there to the video recording. Lots of good things, as I said, that Dale has done that you can read about, and films, etc., like Seaspiracy. So just in terms of Water COP 26, which is my initiative, Dale.
27.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Water COP 27. So as of yesterday, which was the 1st of September, registration is now open. So people can register on an app called Atlas Go. From the 22nd of September, we have our first town hall in Scotland, and we will have this virtual walk. And it's a walk, a run, a cycle, or traveling in a wheelchair, notionally from Scotland all the way down to Egypt, where we will walk where we are. We'll feel, and the reason we're doing this is threefold. One is to create an opportunity to learn from each other. So a lot of opportunity to speak to each other, to hear people talk, like Dale, for instance, and for us to learn. So the second thing, and by the way, to speak, we want to hear everybody, you know, and get everybody's voice. The second point is really solidarity. And certainly we have the belief that there's a hugely, really fragmented sense of a desire to need to change. So people are increasingly understanding that. I talked about that US statistic, 80 to 37%. And that's part of this idea that, you know, people feel a little bit alone in this. They don't feel together. And so the second bit is building solidarity. And the third thing is just making connections, getting lots of people to connect. And that might be sort of technical things that are connecting on. It might be movements. It might be ways to organize. It might just be friends. So those three things we're trying to achieve. There's a virtual walk. There's a series of town halls going down the different countries to make us feel like we're going through from one place to another. And then the third thing is we have a series of clubhouse sessions where any of the participants can lead a clubhouse session. We've got 20 on the website at the moment. Please have a look at the website, have a look at that, and join us in that walk. And Dale, obviously, if you join us, we would be delighted.
All right. Thank you. I have no idea, actually. I haven't quite got my head around how you have a virtual walk on an app, but I'll take a look.
Very good. Okay, thank you so much for your time, and have a very good afternoon.